Welcome everyone to the second in the series of Startup Know-How panel discussions offered by IALS Venture Development in collaboration with the UMass Amherst Technology Transfer Office. Today's topic is what founders need to know about startup law before they have a startup attorney. I'm Isabel Nasty, Assistant to the Director of Communications and Marketing here at the Institute for Applied Life Sciences. Next, just a few housekeeping items. This seminar is being recorded. If you miss any part of this panel discussion or would like to forward it to someone who could not attend, there will be a replay of this and all future seminars in this series on our website. We will put the link in the chat. I recommend you set your view mode to speaker throughout and please stay muted during the talks. We will save Q&A until the end of all presentations. During that time, I welcome you to unmute yourself and please ask your question. Also, you can put your questions into the chat. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. We will do our best to answer all of them. Next up, I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Karen Utgoff, who is Director of IALS Venture Development and I-Core at UMass Amherst. Karen? Karen?
Trouble unmuting, just bear with me. Oh, okay, we'll do it this way. So hi everybody, thank you so much for coming and thank you Isabel for taking such good care of us. We're especially appreciative of the support that Isabel and Lisa Korpieski, who could not be here today, give for these talks. As Isabel said, I'm the Director of IALS Venture Development and I am the Site Director for the UMass I-Core site. I want to say a word about today's awesome panel before I turn it over to them. I'll just show you who. So Matt Whitehead is here with us from Feinberg Hanson, LLP. Matt received his JD from Boston College Law School in 2013. During his last year as a student there, he was a clerk in the UMass General Counsel's office. As an attorney, he began his career at McLean Middleton, and in 2017 moved to Pasternak, Blankstein, and Lund. Moved in 2017 from Pasternak, Blankstein, and Lund to Feinberg Hanson. In early 2019, Charlie Johnson of the Eisenberg School introduced us, and Matt asked how he could help. He graciously consented to do office hours, which he has been doing since last November, to work with our startups and pre-startups, give them some advice on startup law, and we're delighted to have him here today. Welcome, Matt. Rilwan Meeran is Portfolio Manager and Head of Impact Investments at MassMutual. In that capacity, he leads the Springfield Venture Fund, and he's committed to making investments right here in Western Massachusetts. Impact investors are typically committed to socially beneficial outcomes in addition to the bottom line, which aligns well with our commitment at IALS to developing pre-startups and startups that benefit human health and well-being, broadly construed. Rilwan received his MBA from the University of Chicago and his undergraduate degree from the Eisenberg School right here. So welcome, Meeran. Welcome, Rilwan. I'm really delighted to have you here. Next up will be Julie Bliss Mullen, founder and CEO of Aclarity. I'm sure that many of you have heard her name. I met her when she was a graduate student in civil engineering, and she has gone on to establish Aclarity with a colleague of hers that she met in a class, Eisenberg MBA, Barrett Mullen. She is widely recognized as a real thought leader. She's won recognition from the Northeast Water Innovation Network, the National Academy of Inventors. She was named to the Forbes 2019 30 Under 30 in Science, and she and Barrett won the Innovation Challenge in 2017. So she's done a great job with Aclarity. They are funded by both investors and SBIRs, and welcome, Julie. Finally on our panel is Ken Carter. He's professor of Polymer Science and Engineering, co-founder of a company called Fog Kicker, and also founder of a company whose name I cannot pronounce. I'm going to do my best. I think it's Katerinik, but he'll tell us later. It's a bootstrap company focused on developing and commercializing new technologies. It's hard for me to say welcome to Ken because we spend a lot of time together. He's the faculty director for the iCare site, and we do many things together and spent all Saturday last weekend together. So, but welcome, Ken. Thank you for being here today. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to turn it over now to Ken as our first speaker to share the faculty founders' perspective on what faculty founders should know about startup law before they have a startup attorney.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to join everybody today on this kind of overcast, yucky day. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a faculty founder's perspective. And today's topic is really pointed towards, what to know before you have an attorney and what to know about startup law. Most of the lessons I've learned, just like you learned in iCore, have been like on the ground lessons. I did not know much of anything I was doing in trying to commercialize an idea before we just jumped in and started doing it. I had a great, very dedicated student on the project. And so a lot of things I'll talk about are really just things that I've learned over the last few years, and hopefully it'll be useful. Karen, how much, I don't want, I can blah, blah, blah. How much time do you want me to take?
I'd like to suggest that each of the panelists takes 3 to 5 minutes, and then we will open it up to questions and discussion.
Beautiful, beautiful, perfect. So again, having learned, looking back over the last 4 years since we launched our first initiative, I've learned a lot. And what I would say, to answer specifically the question, there's several bullets here I put up. One thing, before you even contact an attorney, the thing you should know is have a firm idea of who your initial team is and clearly delineate the different responsibilities for different people. For example, I started with, my graduate student and another undergrad from the business school. And it's really important to have a, good idea of who is in the operation and what your individual roles are going to be. I mean, you can define it further later on and change things and add things, but really have a really good idea of what that initial team is. Another thing as a faculty member that's really important is to learn and understand all your conflict of interest things and limitations on what you're allowed to do as a faculty member when you are starting a commercial enterprise and whether you're a co-owner or what your position is. There are various rules that we have to follow. GenDonate is a great resource for figuring out what you need to do besides just the initial disclosures. But I think, again, if we're talking about startup law and before you talk to an attorney, you should understand what your conflict of interest are and what limitations things that you may think you could do or cannot do. Lots of rules out there, but none of them have been difficult to navigate. You just have to know what they are. Next thing I'd say, again, right before you talk to an attorney, you have your team. Now you need to have some frank discussions about ownership structure, finances, where money, you're just getting off the ground. You may not even have any money yet, but what are you going to do about finances and really what your goals are, and really talk to each other about what you expect to get out of the operation. And it's always good to also have an exit plan. Like, here's what I would do. Here's my conditions I would get out of this. If we're at $10 million a year, then I'm out. I'm going to sell my interest, or I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I want this to be my job. But again, you have to have these frank discussions about this ownership and finances. And again, it's very useful because one of the first things your attorney is going to ask you is like, well, what do you guys really want to do? That's going to help how they structure and give you advice. And finally, understand your business landscape. And this is where like iCore comes in and other programs like this. But you really need to understand more than just guesses, who are your competitors, who are your potential customers. If you're doing something in healthcare, for example, what are your potential liabilities? And really importantly, what's your IP position? What's your intellectual property position? Who owns the idea? Does anybody own the idea? Does somebody else own the idea? Can you license the idea? If it's an open idea, you really need to think about, well, then anybody could do it, right? So you really understand your IP position. And a lot of the stuff that we cover in both I-Core and other programs on campus to help young, or not so young in my case, people start to understand these kind of basic concepts. So that's it for now. I'll be happy, looking forward to talking to everybody and any questions you might have.
Next, Julie, I'd like you to unmute and talk about the startup experience from the founder's perspective. You've come a long way since we first met, and it might even have been a little difficult for you to remember before you had a startup attorney. But please share give us the benefit of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've gone through, we've had a good amount of attorneys, so I'm happy to talk about all the different types of attorneys, and that kind of goes to my fourth bullet, but I'll get there. The first one is, I think it's really, really important to sit down with you and your team, whether that is yourself or yourself and a co-founder or many people on your team, whoever it is, and set some goals and figure out, oh, in my ideal, and Barrett and I did this, actually, I'm really happy we did this, sit down and figure out, in my ideal world, if we had an office, what would that office look like? And if we had if we had installations, right? We're a water treatment company, so we install these systems you can see below, in various customer sites, right? What customers do we want to work with, and what kind of ideals do we want to embody? And 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, it's been a long time. It's been 3.5 years. Looking back and trying to figure out, have we deviated from that? And that's fine. And it's okay if we, it's so important to pivot as a startup, but setting those goals, they're loose goals, but just sort of ideals and aspirations will really help you to define what type of company you want to be. And then I think then you can start to figure out what type of legal needs you have. So that's really the first one. The second one is, Ken said this too, but I think it's really important to discuss the founder roles. In my case, actually, the roles switched. We kind of did a 180. Barrett was originally the business person. I was the technical person. We've switched that, and that's okay. But we needed to understand at first who's kind of responsible for what was the commitment from the founders or from the founding team, and then you start to discuss equity. I've always heard the advice I've been given over and over when I started this company was, you don't give equity for what the person has done. You give equity for what the person, or you negotiate equity for what the person will do in the future. And it's so important to have that open communication to talk about this is again goes back to point one, what your aspirations are individually and as a company. And then you can decide, how to split that up. And I know there was a question about vesting, and yes, vesting is really important. We're both on a vesting schedule. And so is essentially everybody else in the company who is a stakeholder, a non-investor. Okay, the third bullet is utilize pro bono services. There's a ton of them. There's an attorney on this call today, and I would recommend that you reach out to him. Utilize pro bono services. UMass offers a lot of opportunities, getting involved in accelerators like Valley Venture Mentors, I-Core, the Birth Hume Accelerator. There's so many local groups, and then there's, once you start to have a clear idea of your product market fit and get a business plan together, there are some really awesome global accelerators that can put you in touch with legal teams. And then the last bullet point is find out what legal team you actually need. Once you have gone through step one of what kind of company you want to be, maybe you decide that you want to be an impact kind of company, and maybe a B Corp is something that you want to be really, something you want to strive to be, or maybe you want to just and I say just, it's not just, it's really important. Instead of selling, you want to license your technology, and you want to be an IP generating monster and sell, and license all that IP. Then, the legal team is going to be different. For us, we have 3 completely different, groups of attorneys. I can go into this in further detail later on, but we have a startup attorney. We have a industry-specific attorney that helps us with our materials transfer agreements and negotiations with partnerships and license agreements. And then we have an IP attorney, IP firm we work with. So there's a whole lot here, but I'll stop there and let the next person talk, and then I can answer questions.
Karen, you're muted, but I think you're asking me to go, so I'll go. Or not.
Sorry, my cursor is confused about between slide advance and muting, so I apologize. But yes, please, Rilwan. I'd love to get your investors' perspective. My experience, many startups don't take into account, even if they are anticipating taking a round of funding, they don't anticipate the investor's perspective before they actually start to form a company or start to think about what a company should be like. So please share your wisdom with us.
Well, first of all, thank you, Karen, for inviting me. It's a privilege and honor to speak to all of you today. And I just want to start by saying UMass has grown so tremendously over the last 20 years. I'm amazed of how far the university has gone. I'm teaching a class on the weekends for an MBA group, and these students are far, far more brighter than I ever was a long time ago. So I'm really proud to see the progress of the university and the caliber of students. At MassMutual, we have a small venture fund that I inherited called the Springfield Venture Fund that we invest in early stage technology companies. So doing seed and up to Series A investments. And, I want to share a few items that I've come across when I deal with entrepreneurs that come up time and time again. A lot of times when companies are being formed, when they're at that seed early stage of development, when they're putting together their company in terms of incorporation and so forth and divvying up the shares, a lot of times early stage investors find themselves spending a lot of time with entrepreneurs, educating them about what equity means and dilution and how to structure your company and so forth. And a lot of that stuff in the olden days was, there's these archaic terms, they didn't even know what it meant. Now everything is very clear on the internet, or the people in your network can educate you about it. It's really simple, and I would encourage all entrepreneurs to understand, if you form a company and you divvy up the equity, over time you're going to raise more capital. And what does that mean in terms of dilution, right? And over time, if you start with a series or a seed stage investment, and you project out to Series A, B, C, where you feel like you're going to raise multiple rounds of capital, what does that really mean in terms of your shareholding and your future growth of your company, right? So as Julie mentioned, as well Ken mentioned as well, that you need to incorporate what the equity you need for the future will be, and you need to project that out. And once you understand the nomenclature, it helps to have an Excel spreadsheet to show how this thing will progress over the life of the investment. I would say that's number one. And so there's a lot of work you can do to self-educate yourself before you actually hire an attorney and have them explain to you what all these items mean. Because the more you're savvy on these investment terms, you will be able to negotiate better with investors, right? And so, and I would recommend that once you do that, you basically sound test it, with some investors or some angel investors that may not necessarily invest in your company, but just once you understand what you want to do, just you use them as a sounding board. Say, hey, look, I'm thinking about raising $2 million. This is the capital structure today. If I raise 2 million, this is what I think the dilution will be, and this is what I think it's going to take over the next 4 to 5 years to get to where I want to go, which is my vision. What do you think of this? And let them poke holes into it. And then once you've done that once or twice, then go to and speak to an investor, because you'll be in a better negotiating position, you'll be better informed, and the investor will understand that he's dealing with a much more savvy entrepreneur. I would say that's number one. Number two, I would say, do what is organic for your growth. So a lot of people are talking about B Corps and things like that. If that's not what you can do right now, because there's inherently an expense associated with B Corps of getting a third party to verify it and so forth, don't do it right now. Do it when you can do it, but focus on your mission and your growth trajectory. And don't try to do something that's not natural to your growth. Do something that's natural for your trajectory of where you want to go. I would say that. And then lastly, about impact investing and governance. So impact investing, as you all know, is investing for a double bottom line, which is a market rate, as well as extracting a positive environmental, social outcome over the life of the investment. So you're investing with the intentionality to extract additionality that is measurable over the life of the investment. So I like to use the word AIM, A-I-M, additionality, intentionality, and measurability. That's what impact investing is. So it's incorporating a private equity model of investing where you can track the positive outcomes over the life of the investment, and your capital, which is the contribution for that additionality, is being measured. And so I would also say that a lot of investors want corporate governance. They want either a board seat or observer rights. They want to make sure you have subcommittees. And so you should, as an entrepreneur, be ready to take on, if you take on institutional investment from a corporate VC or a venture capital firm, you should be ready at some point, sooner rather than later, to form a board and have a governance structure in place. I will say that most investors, when you have a board of directors or governance in place, they feel more comfortable, and that gives them more comfort to invest in your enterprise. And so that's my small pieces of advice.
Thank you, Rilwan. That's great. Next, Matt, our attorney, for the attorney's perspective and the cleanup spot here. Matt, please share from your experience. You meet with a lot of founders. What do you wish would come to you with? And
sure. So there's been a lot of good advice from the rest of our panelists here. So makes my job easy because most of the high level points have been touched on. So I'll try to keep this as short as possible to leave more time for questions. But I think just kind of taking a step back, the first question that you really just want to familiarize yourself with is why even form a company? What are the benefits to doing that? And, of course, the first point would be you protect yourself from a liability standpoint. And, kind of before you go off and start entering into commercial arrangements or start, supplying, whatever goods or services you might be providing, you want to make sure that you have this protection. So if there's ever any claims made for, a breach of what you've promised or a breach of whatever contract you might sign, you don't want those claims coming back against you in your individual capacity. You want those claims running against the company, the LLC or the corporation. And so that's kind of the second part of this first point, is just kind of having a general understanding of the differences between these general entity types. And, generally we'd see companies organized as a limited liability company or a corporation. And there's pros and cons to each entity type. And a lot depends on your particular mission as a business and venture. And it kind of dovetails with a few of the points that have been discussed before. And, is your goal raising capital? If so, are you looking to raise capital from just friends and family, or would this be more of an institutional round where you'd look to professional angel investors and VC funds and others? Or would you be looking, exclusively for SBIR funding? That's kind of another topic that rolls into our next point as to when you would look to form the company. And again, I generally recommend looking to start engaging in those kind of discussions and that process once you're ready to engage in any type of a commercial arrangement. One, to protect yourself from a liability standpoint, and two, to hold yourself out. It's just a bit more professional in some ways when you can say, oh, we're with X, Y, or Z company or corporation. Also, I'd recommend engaging in this process before you raise funding, so that it's clear that the company is raising the funding and that it's not any individual who's doing this fundraising. And in fact, if you're looking to raise capital through SBIR resources, you would need to have formed your company before going down that road. Next point would be, where should I form the company? And again, this relates to what your general business goals would be. If you're a service provider, you're not really interested in pursuing the venture capital model. It's probably fine to organize in whatever state you're based in, so that you don't then need to make additional foreign qualification filings if you incorporate in Delaware, for instance, but you're based in Massachusetts. It may not make sense in that case to have to deal with all of these different filings and administrative procedures. Whereas if you were to pursue the standard VC route of financing, we'd almost always recommend that you would do so by incorporating in Delaware, and then filing whatever foreign qualification filings are required based on where you and your team are located. Then the final point I have is how do you actually go about forming your company? And this is more technical, and I think for purposes of this particular panel, I think it's enough to say that you'd really want to just do some basic Google research in terms of what types of agreements do we need to put in place. How do we one, actually form the company? We need to file a certificate in a particular state, at which point this company would be formed. How do we actually issue stock? How do we get equity to each founder once we've allocated that equity and determined what those percentages look like? How do we protect the company's IP? What types of employment or non-disclosure IP assignment agreements do we need to sign to accomplish that? So I think just kind of familiarizing yourself with those general concepts is helpful, and that leads to a smoother transition and discussion when you first approach an attorney.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, Rilwan. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Ken. We are going to open it up for questions now. And so, put your questions in the chat, or we want you to unmute, and and we will see where it takes us. I do have an initial question to throw out. Thank you all of you who submitted questions when you registered. So the first one is a biggie, and maybe you could each talk about it if it applies to you. What are some common potential entanglements that people might bring to a startup team? Pre-existing commercial relationships, for example, and what do you need to be mindful of as you enter into a new team in terms of shedding those, closing those off, making sure they don't impinge. And I'll just open it to, and if the person who submitted that question wants to expand on it, I'd encourage him or her to unmute and do that. Go ahead, David.
You encapsulated it exactly as I intended. So thank you so much to the panel. I know it's a big question, and this is something I've been working with our technology transfer office to get a good handle of the NDAs that we have and the MTAs and that kind of stuff. I don't think we have anything major involved, but I'm just curious about, we don't want to step in it, you know, or have something that's pre-existing that would limit our ability to maintain our interests moving forward.
I mean, I'll take a quick stab at it. You know, we just formed our second company, which is in the process of absorbing the first company because some things kind of went wrong, right? And boy, talk about entanglements, right? You know, when you are trying to find assets and don't have control over a lot, I mean, it's a nightmare, right? So I'm probably on the more extreme side of starting a company, trying to catch up with what had been done with the old company. And that's where legal advice has really been coming in very, very handy, because it's kind of a slow and difficult process, but it's important, right? Because reason why I want to do this correctly is, you don't want to go down the road. We're all startups right now, but you don't want to go down the road in 5 years you're successful and have somebody come back after you, right? So it's very important, and that's something if you're worried about where you stand in terms of ownership of stuff or anything, I think the attorneys can be very, very useful in providing that help and that information.
I'll add to, I think Aclarity did a lot of the paving at UMass for conflict of interest and licensing and whatnot. And actually, both Burnley and Jen Donay are awesome. So if you haven't talked to either of them, make sure to do that. They will clear up any kind of conflict of interest issues with sincere integrity, which is really, really important. So I wouldn't be afraid, and they're free. So I would do that, and then definitely talk to an attorney about any questions you have.
Yeah, I would echo those responses, and it depends on how the typical lawyer response is. It depends. Everything is always based on context and the precise facts that we're working with here. But it's true that we just need to make sure we understand the whole situation. But basically, you want to make sure that any IP has been assigned over to the company. And so if you're going down the path where you maybe have some commercial agreements that have already been signed prior to forming the company, I would say that it does get a little bit more complicated, because you really need to work through, okay, who has these rights? If it's not the company, was it a group that existed prior to the company? Is it all the same members that will be, the shareholders and founding group of that company? So I do think that this is, a situation where you might consider approaching counsel to see, okay, what do we need to do to protect ourselves on a going forward basis? Because, as Ken said, it's the type of thing that, you very well could not address for a year, 2 years, 5 years. And, at some point after you've subsequently established your company, someone from this initial group comes after you and says, well, hold on, I don't have equity in this company, but I was part of the group that, has these contractual rights. So that's the type of thing that you always want to be careful of. And so at that point, probably makes sense to think about, okay, maybe we should be moving forward with setting up our company.
Yeah.
Rilwan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I would just add to what Matt and Julie said. I would just say have this all buttoned up before you approach investors. If you have a product or service that came out of a university, make sure all those agreements are all taken care of, because the first thing an investor is going to say is, what's the arrangement? And you need to have that buttoned up. I have seen in my career where a product was spun out from a university, and they had, for example, a 5-year licensing agreement, and by the time the company was in a position to take on some funding, they were in year 3 and they only had 2 years left. And then the investors said, okay, what happens now? And then that company had to actually stop and then go back to the university and renegotiate for a longer tenure for this licensing arrangement. And it just took the whole funding process off the rails. And then the investors left and it was almost like a restart. So have all of it buttoned up and make sure, again, I go back to that cap table and dilution thing, project it out, because this is an important aspect to your future growth.
Thank you. That is great. And it leads us right into the next question, or one of the next questions, which is equity splits. How do you, it's all good and well to say, Julie and Ken both said, oh, talk with your team and all that. What are some good ways to think about equity splits and to document them so that you don't run into the kind of problem that that Matt just mentioned, or some of the problems going forward that Rilwan wants you to anticipate? So first of all, what advice from entrepreneurs do we have about how to talk about this?
It's really tough. I was very lucky and am very lucky to have a really good co-founder. And so this was really easy for me. I hope it's as easy for you. I came up with the technology and founded the company and actually had a search for a co-founder. So I think when I onboarded Barrett, we both are co-founders and we're both equal in each other's eyes. But we had to have a discussion about, what roles we see each other having now, what commitment and now meaning at the time of the conversation, what kind of, are we doing this full-time, part-time? And so it's really difficult. I mean, it's truly difficult, and I don't think there's really a magical answer, and there's really no defined way for how to do it. But you just have a heart-to-heart conversation about what you think you offer, and what you think the other, your other co-founder or co-founders offer, and that everybody does that collaboratively, and have a discussion and figure it out. I would say I've gotten the advice from a lot of people, and I read a lot. I'm making a plug for this book. I don't represent them by any means, but the Founder's Dilemmas is a really good book. If you want to try and read about equity splits and about, so many things about forming a company, it's the Bible. I forget what I was going to say, but, defining roles is really important. Defining commitment is really important.
So let me jump in on that note, Julie. And so Shane is asking, in terms of equity in companies and shares, what are some of the roles and responsibilities that are important to talk about? And what roles and responsibilities do you maybe recognize now that weren't obvious back then?
That's a hard question. It's a good question. Roles and responsibilities. It was just the two of us. Really, it was me. It was just me for a little while, and then I brought Barrett on, and we needed to figure out who was developing the product, who was who understands the industry, who is going to be responsible for making sure that there's cash in the bank, because we didn't pay ourselves for a long time. Thankfully, we ended up applying for some grants, and we got those, and we were able to fund ourselves full time. That was phenomenal. But those are roles. So fundraising is a role. Market development is a role. It kind of goes into sales. I think marketing and sales, when you're a really, really early stage company, are sort of the same. building the product and getting the product out in terms of operations. When you get an SBIR or any type of, most types of grants, especially, when you get venture backed, you have to have log your time, you have to, have accounting and all those proper G&A things that need to happen. And so that's in itself managing managing finances and accounting and having all the logistics and in-house or hiring somebody to do that is all really important. So I just threw out a whole bunch of stuff out there in no real order, but those are examples of some early roles that are really important.
Ken.
Yeah, I mean, again, learning all this on the ground, as I'm sure Julie did most of it as well, and doing it the second time, one thing I realized right up front that was really important that we didn't really anticipate in the first company was, like you said, Julie, financing and accounting, right? I mean, and record keeping. It's one thing to have a great idea, be excited about it, and go hit the road, hit the pavement, and start selling stuff, and start marketing, and doing all the gee whiz fun stuff, but when we tried to get investors with the first company, it's kind of like Rilwan was saying, people looked at us and were like, who are these jokers, right? I mean, where are your records? Where's your business plan? And we just didn't have that stuff, and we should have had it. And so lesson learned, it's something I didn't think of from the beginning, is really to show you have not just the people, but the behind the scenes that you really are, you're really an organization that's worth trusting, right? And that you're tracking everything. Not that the first company is doing anything wrong. It's just we weren't really paying attention to the details. So somebody asked us, "What are your profits last month?" We couldn't even answer the question because it wasn't even a spreadsheet, right? So things like that I've learned. So the new company, right up front, we have a financial person. That's probably for me maybe the biggest thing. I think Julie kind of echoed that as well.
And jumping in, just in terms of actually determining what the equity split would be, companies all handle this differently, and founder groups all have different approaches. I have some startup clients where they're super formulaic about it, where they'll write down different duties and different roles, and they'll assign different weighted amounts to each of those, and then use that to derive what someone's percentage is, out of 100. Others, it's a bit more art than science, and they just kind of say, okay, here's kind of what I think would be in keeping with the market, with what we're seeing other friends at other startups doing, what our advisors are telling us. And then others are just, they come into this venture together and they say, you know what, it's 3 of us, we each get 1/3, and just kind of leave it at that. So it's there's really different approaches here, and I don't know that one is better than the other. I think what's important is that you're thoughtful about it. As Julie was saying, it's just you really want to be transparent and make sure that everyone is on the same page. That's what's most important.
I want to go back a little bit in terms of picking a team and what your role is, and this is really my statement now really for the faculty that are on the call. When I did the initial I-Corps national program, one thing I wanted to learn in that whole thing was like, what is the role of a faculty member in a startup company, right? And I asked everybody, and I got very vague answers, and it was never addressed in any of the curricula. We teach customer discovery and students with their role, or mentors with their role, like Gregory Thomas is our mentor, but nobody had anything to say to the faculty about what is your role, what should your equity be, nothing. And then I went online, and as everybody does, I looked at Google it. What is a faculty's role in a startup? You'll get like nothing. I'm going to write a book, because there is nothing out there that directs you about what you should think you're going to get out of it. And the advice that I got was all over the place. And so to the faculty out there, if you're wondering like what you should be doing, you're probably doing exactly what you should be doing, because nobody really knows.
And I'll add one more real quick thing too. It's students, really important to engage your faculty on this and have an open discussion about how they want to be involved. It's also important to distinguish between a founder and an advisor. And this goes student to student, student to faculty, faculty to faculty. Some faculty want to be really involved, but they don't have the time to do it. And so maybe an advisor role is the way to go. Other times they may be able to take a couple days off or whatever and actually work real hard and produce content and, you know, do a lot of work, in which case they're a team member. So there's a lot of stuff to think about.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to talk about vesting, which is somewhat related to equity splits, but I'm going to ask Matt to kick us off with an explanation of vesting and how a vesting schedule may relate to forming the company. And then I'm going to ask Rilwan to say why vesting is important from the investor's point of view and what he likes to see in the underlying legal foundation.
Sure. So, you know, we just talked about equity split. And so let's say, for instance, that you determine that one founder is entitled to 25% of the company. So you'd put together, at this point, you're engaging with counsel and you put together these equity documents. And so what you do, you wouldn't typically issue all 25% to that founder, at least not on a fully vested basis. And the reason for that is you want, you know, kind of to Julie's point earlier, you want the founder to earn that equity over time. So this is not something where you just say, okay, this founder, they're getting 25% and they have it all at once. You know, they need to earn their keep and earn that 25%. And it's typically done that, you know, your equity would vest over a 4-year period. And the standard schedule would be, you know, it's a 4-year vesting period. The first 25% of your equity would vest at the 1-year anniversary date of the date of grant. And then the balance would vest on a quarterly or monthly basis thereafter until the 4-year anniversary of that initial date of grant. And, you know, I can say that far too many times founders kind of neglect to do this, and it can cause real problems with one founder after 6 months just saying, you know what, I'm moving on to my next venture. But if they're fully vested, they own their full 25%, whatever their stake is, and that's really going to clog up your cap table going forward.
So Rilwan, that sounds like a segue to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Matt. I would just on the back of what Matt said. So from an investor point of view, for example, I had a call today with a company of 2 scientists that are currently at Brown University, and they've created this great product. They realized they're scientists, they need a CEO. They brought in the CEO. They gave him 18% of the company and then left 10% as an option pool. That makes 100%. Now, the 2 scientists recognize that, you know, they're really at the early stage and they're just about to get their first client. They need this CEO to stay in place for many years, and so they gave him a 5-year vesting schedule, so 20% a year over the next 5 years. And if he can be with the company for 5 years and achieve the milestones, he would achieve the full 18% of his equity that was granted to him by these 2 co-founders, the 2 scientists who created this product. From an investor point of view, that's a good thing because, you know, longer vesting schedules are what investors like to see because they want to see that core team stay in place. They don't want to see executives come in after 2 years, be fully vested, and then they leave and they've left with all their equity. No one likes that, especially not investors. So longer investing periods are what investors like, And they also like to see, when you create option pools, what does the option pool look like for in future employees and future hires, right? So it's usually be 10 or 20%. And usually those pools have 4 or 5 year vesting periods for new employees that you incentivize to bring in at your enterprise. So.
That's great. Thank you. Just say a quick word about vesting, equity splits, and either advisors or board members, as you, if either Matt or Rilwan.
Go ahead, Matt.
In terms of the actual like percentages, I guess basically a distinction between founders and advisors is, founders would be entitled to receive actual shares of stock in the company, whereas typically advisors would receive an option grant. And so that's when Rilwan is saying that you create an option pool, that's a pool that's used to incentivize both employees and consultants and advisors. And advisors would receive a much smaller percentage stake in the company. And they're not, it's not a stake that's just equity that vests over time. It's something that they would need to exercise their option, which also would need to vest over time. And that option upon exercise would convert into equity. And again, it's a much smaller percentage, kind of depending on certain factors, but that's kind of generally how it would work.
Yeah, that's right, Karen. I agree 100% with Matt.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so let me, we are almost out of time, so let's do just a lightning round here. We had a question about international students starting companies and what kind of visas they needed, and what kind of resources they needed, to maybe extra resources they needed before they could start a company. So Matt, you want to start off on
Sure. Yeah. So just to preface this with, I'm a corporate lawyer, and immigration is not my primary specialty, but in the course of working with many startups over the years, immigration matters do come up, and I do discuss with other lawyers who specialize in immigration, so I have a passing familiarity with this. And generally, I think the question was, are you able to form and run a business on an F1 visa? And my understanding is that while you'd be able to form the company, you would not be able to actually operate, perform your business functions for that company. You'd need your OPT in order to move forward with that.
And I'll just add to that the International Programs Office on campus does have a list of immigration attorneys, and I have reason to believe that they have experience not just with student visas, but with the kind of visa you need to start a company. So we have 5 minutes left. We have many more questions. And many things. I wish we could stay here for another hour, but we can't. I'd just like to ask each of the panelists for closing thoughts, and maybe we will take panelists in the order we started with. So I think we started with Ken. So Ken, can you kick off the final thoughts? Oh, you're muted.
No, my final thoughts are just, these kind of forums are great, right? And maybe in some ways Zoom enables a lot more of this than, if we had tried to schedule an hour in some conference room over an IALS. So my final thoughts are really, ask a lot of questions. You're going to get different types of answers from different kinds of people, but I think that's one great thing about this particular panel is that, you have somebody from the investment community, you have somebody that's from the legal community, and then you have, student, former student, and some faculty. But just keep asking these questions, right? Because it's really, the more information you have up front, the better off you're going to be. So that's kind of my take-home point from this whole discussion.
Thanks, Ken. Julie?
I completely agree. I think UMass has an amazing ecosystem in terms of support. I think, go to Karen, go to Burnley, go to Jen, go, to Berthume. They can help to answer your general questions, and if they don't know the answers, then they'll point you to the people who can. Also, really, really take advantage of pro bono opportunities. Ask whatever questions you have, and when it starts to get uncomfortable on the other end, that whoever that is that's doing the pro bono work will tell you. But don't abuse it. But it's really important to get some of your legal questions taken care of. That, especially if they're relatively, if there's standard questions that legal people get asked pretty often, they will be very happy to answer them pro bono for the most part. Just ask.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. Rilwan. Yeah.
I would say, you guys are all blessed with immense resources at UMass. I mean, again, when I was there 20 some years ago, there was nothing. There was, in the whole Western Massachusetts, there was one venture firm, and now there's close to 10. I would also say that UMass is blessed with actual practitioners, right? So Charlie Johnson is running the Meeran Venture Fund. He's right there. You have access to him. You have Karen Utgoff, who's an observer to the MassMutual Springfield Venture Fund. So you have actual people that are teaching, but also actual practitioners that are seeing what's going on day to day in the investment ecosystem. So I think that's a huge benefit that all of you have, and I would leverage that.
And Matt, you get the last word.
And I'd say, if you have other questions, feel free to drop in for startup law office hours. I think it's 2.5, 3 hours a month that I help out there, and can reserve a slot, and happy to assist. And as everyone else said, just don't hesitate to reach out to anyone, really, because the worst thing someone can do is say, sorry, I don't have time to help out. But on the flip side, and more often than not, you'll get at least some positive response, whether it's a direct answer to your question, or a connection to someone else, or being pointed to some resource, whether online or otherwise. I think so often there's a tendency to hang back and not try to seek out those resources and opportunities, and you can be rewarded for doing so. And people are, in my experience, and kind of my strategy in working with others is, it's all about long-term relationships, and you put in some time up front, and dedicate some pro bono time, and good things happen for everyone. So and I'm sure others have that same viewpoint, so definitely don't hesitate.
Thank you. That is a great note to end on. And I would just want to thank Matt for all he has been doing. He's really, I have heard wonderful things, and we are so grateful to have him. This is an absolutely essential resource. To have just a little bit of legal advice up front is fantastic. And
absolutely.
And we are, and I'll thank Rilwan for providing the investor perspective, which again is so important, especially for so many of the ventures that we are working with that really have the potential to have very high impact, both in terms of social impact and also in terms of growth and financial impact. So really creating value in every way. We are going to be doing another one of these next month, I believe November 19. That will be on intellectual property. We are so grateful that the TTO is our collaborator in these sessions, and it will be specifically about IP strategy for university researchers. So with that, please do sign up for Startup Law Office Hours. Please do seek out resources on campus. I-Corps and IALS Venture Development are especially close to my heart. We are actually trying to build companies. So, so I look forward to seeing you.